welcome to the webinar on 100 years of local public services, the first of the online activities of the Turin School of Regulation for this new year. Today's discussion intends to analyze and deepen the way in which energy, water, waste, and public transport services have been organized and approached during the last century. The discussion will be focusing on the principle at the basis of the organization of local public services and how these logics have been approached in the course of the last 100 years by the academy and the policy sector. And we will try to underline the outcome of this discussion in terms of organization and implementation of local public services. There will be, of course, focus also on the effects of the COVID-19 in the economy and organization of these services. So the discussion, we will discuss about these themes with 5 experts. So I'm going to introduce each one of you. Giorgio Brosio, Professor Emeritus at the University of Torino. He has been a professor at the University of Bari and Genova, and of course of Torino. He has served as president of the Italian Public Economic Association from 2009 and to 2012, and as a president of the European Public Choice Society from April 1992 to April 1993. He's member of the board of the Italian Association of Regional Economics, and his research interests are focusing on public choice, fiscal federalism, and public sector economies, including education and healthcare. He has worked as consultant for many international institutions on public sector reform and development, with emphasis on taxation, natural resource, and decentralization issues. We also have the pleasure to have with us Andrea Giuntini from the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, where from 2000 he's Associate Professor of Economic History. His research deals with contemporary economic history, and his main field of research are history of network, energy, transport and communication, public infrastructure, and urban histories. He's member of several scientific associations and is also in the editorial board of diverse journals. We also have Maria Salvetti. She's a water economist and a policy analyst with nearly 20 years of experience. She's a special advisor at the Florence School of Regulation, and since 2019, she works for the water governance program at the OSDC. Previously, she was part of the Economic and Public-Private Partnerships chair in La Sorbonne University. She coordinated a European working group on the economic regulation of the water sector in partnership with the Florence School of Regulation. She has worked as an expert for the World Banks and many other roles, and she's a tutorial teacher at the University La Sorbonne and at Paris and Lille Institute for Political Science for master students. We also have Andreas Bandati. He's the Director General of CISPEL Toscana, a regional association of local public services enterprise in the sector of public utilities. And since 1990, a major part of his research and works have been related to public utilities and in particular to waste management. And then we have Franco Becchis, the scientific director of the Fondazione per l'Ambiente and Turin School of Regulation. So I'm very happy to welcome you all. And I just want to mention before to start the discussion that there is the possibility to ask questions to our speakers, writing on the chat, Q&A chat, and hopefully at the end of the session there will be the time for answer some of these questions. So I'm leaving the floor to Franco Becchis for his introduction.
Thank you, Monica. The idea of this seminar actually came out from a meeting with Andrea Sbandati on the seaside in August during the lockdown break, and we were sitting at a restaurant in the period in which restaurants were open, and Andrea said to me, Franco, we know each other since '95, and we discussed about local public services, organization, liberalization, efficacy, effectiveness for years. And then I don't understand, said Andrea Sbandati, which is the outcome of all this stuff that we have produced in 20 years around the issue of local public services, academic paper, meetings, seminars, and classroom, and so on. And starting from this idea that as in a way, a rhetoric answer, that as we will see, the outcome as being very poor because practically nothing has changed from the institutional point of view. But starting from the hint by Andrea this summer, I started to imagine a kind of trip from the first years of the 20th century today around this sector: water, energy, transport, waste, sewage treatment, and a trip that can put the issue in a historical perspective, in a public finance perspective, and in a also regulatory and management perspective. And then we started to imagine the main step that an initiative, a seminar should touch. And I will just say something about this step and leaving then the floor to my guest, to my speakers. The first step is starting from 100 years ago, is a question: is the notion of municipal socialism that has been widely used to describe European cities in the first decades, especially of the 20th century, is really a word that can explain, an expression that can explain something, or is it maybe an emphasis on something that is much more trivial, that is, that who better than the mayor of a city can manage public lighting and waste collection, just as a provocative question. And maybe Andrea Giuntini can help us in his intervention to understand better this question. Then we can make a jump from the first part of the 20th century to the last decades of the 20th century, when we all experienced the fever of the liberalization that came out from the academic environment from one side, but also from the managerial environment. This fever was, in few words, the idea that also water, waste, and transport and sewage treatment should be committed to competition, tenders, and regulation as far as it was concerned. And so we experienced this wave, in particular in the 80s, not only in the national network service like electricity, telephone, railways, but also at local level. And this wave is the reason why I said before what has been the outcome of of these tenders, of this market opening at European level? What has been the effective outcome of it, and how have it changed, if he has changed, the organizational and the efficiency aspects of local public services? So there are a lot of questions that we can discuss. Let me start with Andrea Giuntini, asking him if he can help us to put some of these incomplete, for sure, aspects in a historical perspective. Andrea.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. That's the first thing. And it is the second time that I am a guest of the Turin School of Regulation. I was a guest some years ago for your summer school, and it was a very exciting experience. And so congratulations from me for what you did and what you are doing with your work. Our host, Franco, in his introduction, written introduction and oral introduction, is putting a very intriguing question concerning two different historical periods. I am an economic historian, so my viewpoint will be a typical economic historian viewpoint. He says, who can manage local services better than the mayor? Referring to the, let's say, three last decades of the 19th century and first couple of decades in the 20th century. Around roughly 50 years that we define as the second industrial revolution, that is traditional definition adopted by economic historians. But we say something more which will help us to understand better. It was also the time of the first globalization, as many scholars today argue. Who can manage? Generally speaking, I agree with Franco, with our host, but I think that we should add some considerations. So, firstly, starting from a very basic point, I think that the urban infrastructures and services constitute, referring to the first historical period, the 50 years of the so-called first globalization, are constituting a privileged observation point and maybe a litmus test for grasping the terms involved in the process of economic and social progress of cities. I'm mostly referring to Italy, but what I say for Italy is probably good also for the most part of the Western European countries in the same historical epoch, and probably also for US. Very similar economic processes involved Western European countries and US in those 50 years concerning the great transformations of cities, the great transformation of local public services. A network of services represents one of the more convincing vehicles, according to me, for moving towards the modernization of the nations. That is a common point that we say that Western European countries and US are sharing in that span of time. Since the last 3 decades of the 19th century, municipalities have started to offer local services in a different, efficient way, and good tariffs, of course, for the users. Technological achievements, higher levels of scientific knowledge, new demographic trends, which are making new urban dimensions, a greater level of consumption for users, wider typologies of new users, and new typologies of lifestyles. Let's think, for instance, of the widespread process of the standardization and homologation of lifestyles turning into the gradual birth and growth of this so-called mass society. It was called in this way for the first time, exactly referring to this historical period. Um, the model of the middle class city, that was a great novelty, of course, which reached I think, a strong maturity in Italy too. A stronger demand and need of urban services. They are striking phenomena which are changing the shape of cities and the organization of life inside them, starting from the local services, of course. That is the first point. The second point is a theoretical point, but I think it is fitting with our considerations. In these years, a new idea of public services was shaped. This new idea was the completion of old changes, of course, that cities were experiences in this long period. The formation of a new public opinion, so a new consciousness and awareness regarding the activities of the local authorities, and in the final analysis, affecting the development of public sensitivities and the choices of politicians. That is the reason for which I say that it is fitting, I think, also with the great economic and political transformations we are talking about. Not of all of Italy was affected by this change in the same manner, and the typologies that emerge differ remarkably from one area to another. As we will see in a few moments, the municipalization affected much more, was adopted much more in the northern part of the countries and in the central part of the country. The municipal government in this span of time is becoming a privileged place to show the ability of the local ruling classes to run the collective resources. Local bodies had to change completely, to redefine their tasks, assignments, and powers under the pressure of the urban communities, but also under the pressure of the greater and greater force of the political and bureaucratic classes, whose influence was growing. It is the main point for me from a political viewpoint. The number of subjects proposing a new collective demand for urban services increased remarkably, and the municipal authorities were obliged to face the new needs to provide convincing solutions at a scale that was unknown before. That is an enormous step ahead. Municipalities we must consider for municipalities the difficult mobilization of capitals, mostly private capitals, the use of external qualified experts, the level of technicians. Of course, I will try to tell something about the new engineers, the new technicians working in the field in the context of the municipalities, and also the definition of the new cultural principles able to regulate the limits of the public intervention. That was very relevant. That was established in this time, and we have still the heritage of that historical experience, I think. Municipalities in this particular historical period take a double character. From one hand, their economic actions are those typical of private entrepreneurs, while on the other hand, their public role in the society they are following heavily the ideals of public interest. Franco was talking about municipal socialism, but municipal socialism was also an entrepreneur, let's say, was also adopting managerial habits and managerial daily needs. It's a kind of ambiguity, it is true, but it is explaining, fully explaining, I think, the peculiar status of the municipal companies, which were the strong arm of the municipalities. They can win on private companies thanks to their public nature. Nevertheless, they have limits which jeopardize their profitability, and their profitability is the main goal, together with the municipal spirit, the social spirit, the people spirit, we can say. So the city as a whole and in the relations between its components became the testing grounds and implementation area for a new type of project planning, permitting the technological creation of all local services. The technological growth of services and infrastructures, the adoption of a complex set of standards and regulations, the involvement of capital and of qualified professional expertise constitute, I think, the most important results within the framework that we are outlining in a few words. I promised you to say a couple of words also about the role of technicians, which were definitely promoted thanks to the new experience inside the local public services framework. It was a new generation of engineers with special skills. Essentially, we can state that these municipal engineers, mostly engineers, but not just engineers, we know very well, were the ones to replan the face of liberal Italy. That's the reason I studied so long, for the long time, the role of technicians and especially engineers, exactly in the process of nation building after 1861, and in particular in the three last decades of the 19th century, the span of time on which we are working now. And there were other figures, of course, sociologists, architects, economists, sanitarians. They established they were new opinion makers, not just technicians, but also opinion makers, because they directly contributed to plan the new country, to plan the new cities and the new country. Greater technical skills and increased attention towards the needs of citizens, therefore, became compulsory characteristics of the new technicians and the new public administrators. It was a kind of special expertise, I think, that distinguished them from their predecessor so much, and they prepared the modern country of the 20th century. They were bringing a very determined pragmatism, which emerged clearly, and what the technical professionals eagerly defended, in contrast to all theoretical and obsolete approach. The technicians working for municipal governments were the first to become interpreters of the application of solutions made available by technological developments. In the meantime, the level of instruction rose markedly through the peninsula. We know very well the establishment of new university, new polytechnics, and so on. And study abroad, that's very important. I was telling you that we are talking about Italy, but we are talking about the new international context, which is referring to the local public service at an international scale. Study abroad was no longer a strict requirement in order to train as a professional. In addition, they carried news and in-depth information from abroad, which was extremely useful for those working in the field. A direct exchange of experiences was taking place through conferences, frequent visits that they were making regularly. So a very dense network of contacts and exchanges concerning their particular administrative experiences, and that forged several disciplines, in particular the technical one.
Okay.
Sure.
No, sorry then.
Oh, sorry. Just a few words more concerning the
Okay.
the
Okay.
basic point, the municipalization, because the experience of the Italian municipalization is so relevant, and it is composed of the history of many localities, as we know. So we do not have just one single model. That's my idea, but we have many different models under the umbrella of the law of which was adopted, which was made in 1903, as we know very well. It was a point of arrival, the law, but it was also the point of starting of the new golden age of public services. It was introduced in 1903, but as we know, there were many similar experiences which had been established in advance in the last 3 decades of the 19th century, and the law had the capacity, had the possibility to give a different normative organization and economic as well to the many existing experiences in Italy. It was a law which was capable of offering and providing a model for reference, a route for implementation, a form of administrative management that was sufficiently versatile. So not just one single obliged solution, but many different solutions which were adopted in the many different sectors which we are making the local public services framework. And it offered an added value in terms of reference and actuation models, and contributed in a decisive manner to the birth of the new concept of public services, as we were arguing a few moments ago. And so the municipal governments came upon a substantial economic opportunities made available by the management of urban public services in a clearly corporate logic. So we say that, and then I leave the word to other colleagues, that it was not so contrasting. It was not so opposite the basic idea of municipal socialism on the one hand, and the idea of management, the idea of corporate on the other hand. So the basic idea was to exploit the many economic possibilities and opportunities that the new law was making available for the Italian municipalities.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your introduction, and I hope we will have time in the second round to get back to some of these hints. And now I will ask Giorgio Brosi to say something about the financial and the public choice also aspects of the argument. Giorgio, up to you.
Thank you, Franco, and thank you first to thank the Fondazione for inviting me to take part to this hopefully very interesting webinar. So I am a public economist, so I will say something about the public finance aspect of this big phenomenon. Of course, I mean, as Professor Giuntini explained, it was a very rapid technological progress that started in England around 1850, provided the cities with great opportunities. And these great opportunities are reflected in the budget operation of the municipalities. And this will be the focus of my intervention. First, I mean, because the creation of municipal firms created a complex web of links between municipal firms and municipal budget. First, so I link some of the main, I list some of these main links. First, I mean, municipal company, I call them municipal company, independent of the form of organization, can provide cheaper inputs to municipalities. And this was the reason, main reason in the past 2 centuries behind the creation of gas and electricity companies. I mean, second, municipal companies could and still can provide cheaper prices for services and goods consumed by citizens. And this was typical of the so-called municipal socialism, where, for example, bakeries, pharmacies, and water enterprises are created to provide citizens with better prices. Then it's also important to remark that municipal companies can provide cheaper prices for products, for example, electricity consumed, purchased by firms, or provide cheaper prices for services that are purchased by citizens, but which are of interest for firms, to firms. For example, public transportation of workers to the place of work. If we continue, I mean, municipality, and then we come to revenues. Municipality companies can provide revenue, general revenue to municipalities by applying higher instead of lower prices. So this is a contention issue because it turns around what is the objective of municipalization. In turn, higher revenue can be used alternatively for reducing local taxation or for the creation or subsidization of other services. This is another big choice and also I mean, it's a source of debate. Municipal companies can facilitate access to borrowing by municipalities, although this is problematic from a point of view of public financial management, and now it has been restricted. Then, of course, I mean, creation of acquisition of municipality company, that is acts of municipalization, lead to an increase of debt that has to be serviced afterwards. And then also additional debt is created when municipal company operate at a loss, and the losses cannot be sustained by ordinary revenue, that is by taxes. The problem is that not all of these links are today, and above all, were in the past recorded appropriately, creating a number of points of contention between local and central government, local governments and the cities, and between local firms and local governments. Like what is a nice sentence by Waller, who wrote an excellent book on the history of British town and city, and he said, certain point, in general, the lack of proper budgeting and auditing of municipal companies has deprived friends and critics alike of effective ammunition in the struggle. So contention, conflicts or opinion of policies have also been facilitated by the lack of proper budgeting and auditing of municipal companies, which is a problem that still exists now in most of the countries. Anyway, coming back to the opportunities, if we consider all these opportunities that I have listed, I mean, this link between the budget of the municipality and the public companies explain or contribute to explain why in the past as in the present cities recur to municipalization of local utilities. But at the same time, these opportunities create problems if municipal companies are not managed with proper efficiency. Because when efficiency is low, as we know, there are no cheaper price. There cannot be cheaper prices for products and inputs, no higher revenues and the like. But I don't enter in the issue of efficiency per se. I assume that frequently, economic theory say that public production is not as efficient as usually as private production. So I assume the existence of some inefficiency. But I also say that municipal ownership is still justified, also if it is accompanied by some inefficiency in the production. If the alternative shows, that is private production, shows problem with the quality of the products, or when private firms exploit to an unacceptable degree their monopolist power, charging excessive prices. For example, poor water quality in the past as today has provided justification for the intervention in the water, or even in other sectors, for example, the bread in the past. The creation of municipal bakery was started by, problem in the quality of the bread provided by the private sector. More specifically, the lesser incentives municipal firms have to be efficient may be or are compensated by the lack of incentives they have to lower the quality, or more in general, the lack of incentive to exploit the asymmetry of information between the producer and the consumers to the advantage of the producer. In other words, we can have inefficiency with public production, but we are compensated with a better quality of the service. For example, this applies to the water sector. No? We are ready to accept some inefficiency in the production, provided that we get water with better quality. Obviously, if deep inefficiency prevail, then the trade-off with quality become unsustainable. It's obvious. And it's also obvious that in the absence of proper local regulation, most of this consideration would no more apply, and the argument is changed. Just a few words about the choice of the the link between efficiency and usefulness of municipal firm and the choice of the legal form for local companies. Referring to the reality of today. The main alternative today, especially applying to large municipal companies, is between, on the one hand, public firms, which the precise legal framework varies a lot between countries, or municipal firms, firms governed by local government, but subject to private law, to private law code. And on the other hand, the novelty is listed companies. We have now big utilities, publicly owned, locally owned utilities that are listed in the stock market. And this is an interesting case because in the absence of proper auditing of local public firms being listed, the stock exchange provides public information on the operation of the firm, and above all, provides information about the financial health of the company, and which is important. So, the problems with insufficient auditing of local owned firms, partly disappear with listing. And this is important, but on the other hand, listing deprives the local government of levers for maneuvering, of course. For example, discrimination of prices in favor of selected beneficiaries becomes problematic, if not impossible, with a listed company. And also the degree of freedom concerning prices and employment policies is more limited. of course, with listing, I mean, municipal capitalism replaces municipal socialism. Okay. And the listing of a local company and keeping part of the share in the portfolio of local government becomes to a large extent a pure financial investment. It guarantees revenue through dividends, is a liquid asset, but is a rigid instrument from the point of view of its use for local government policies. Moreover, it immobilizes capital resources that could be invested in other sectors or local activities with higher priorities. And this is the main point of contention between politicians and the public and experts. Today, as it was 100 years ago, between friends and foes and enemies of municipal trading. That is, can we ask, that is, we can ask ourselves if it is worth to immobilize the resources in the financial investment, electricity, for example, when the capital could be used for very urgent, crucial projects in other areas of municipal activity. And I stop here.
Thank you, Giorgio. Particularly interesting is your analysis of the governance, stock market, and the financial health that bring to me the question of regulation, if financial market can in a way give help to regulation or not, and of the poorness of local regulatory bodies, but we will be back to this point maybe later. Andreas Bandati, you are actually a director of an association of local public enterprises. So you can give us something about the mood in this particular environment in the last 20 years from your point of view.
Thank you, Franco. Thank you for the introduction, memories of this summer.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a complex argument. I would like to say something simple. In the European legal framework, there is a principle of indifference, not discrimination, regarding the property of companies. So in the legal European framework, you can make any difference between public companies owned by public bodies or private ones. So all are similar, all are on the same field: public company, private company, and public-private partnership. This is it's very important to start from this, because this is our lighthouse. Not discrimination. In the reality, in the culture of economical approach to market, it's very strong an opinion that the state must not be so strong in the market. Any one of us know this argument, no? Not too much. Okay, state can be inside the market with the companies, state, municipalities, and regions, and so on, but not. It's a strange thing. Yeah, we have to stress it, not to. But this is not. There is any link to the European legal framework. If the principle of difference must be adopted, we can make any difference. So companies who are owned by public administration can stay on the free market and play on the free market for everything, and can be inside the regulated market like the others. The only exception that the European legal framework admits is the in-house contract. There is a specific contract. It's very well regulated by the European legislation, so it's an exception, and it is that. So, what happened in Italy? And I try to answer to the question of Franco. 5 years ago, after a long discussion, we have a new national law, Madia law, that say something strange. Say, okay, The company owned by public administration is in a normal form as a commercial one, are normal companies, but not too much. This is very strange because if you are a normal company or not, it's very strange to say you are a normal company, you are on the private legislation, you have on the private employee regulation and so on, but you are not too much normal. You have some limitations, some constriction, so you have a special law for you, so you can compete with the normal arms with the private ones and so on. This is a very incredible choice because it's a very strange one. For example, in Italy, you can make fund a company owned by public administration who want to sell, I don't know, apples and oranges. It's impossible. Why not? But you can make a company who is providing water services. Okay. And this is very difficult to understand exactly why, because the question in an economical approach, Franco, I think you can be very sensitive about this, is an economical question, real deep economical question is, but public administration can be a stakeholder, a stakeholder of a company, can make the entrepreneurs or not. This is if you want to discuss of economical deep approach, we have to ask this question: can a public administration be a normal shareholder of a company? Can has as a final destination the profit or not? You know, Franco, and that we have a lot of companies owned by public administration who do that. Volkswagen is a normal private company owned by the state of some state of Germany. Enel and Eni the same for Italy. So I think that the evidence of concrete life say that it's possible. Why not? It's a form of the public administration, but if this is not possible, it follows that it should be forbidden to make a company owned by public administration. Otherwise, the only street is to come back to the European legal framework. So we are the company owned by public administration are the same of the private one, and they can't have any limitation. Because they can operate on the free market, they can operate on a regulated market, and the only exception is the in-house one. In Italy, and I conclude, we now have 8,500 public company owned by public administration, by state, by the regional administration, by the municipal administration. We discussed since 5 years that they are too much, too many. Why too many? Which is a good limit? 10,000, 1,000, 100, 10, 1. Why we say that there are too many? We have a legislation that say we have to reduce this number. It's a very incredible things because why we have to decrease, which is the reason? Because they have a pathology of inside them. So it's inefficient. There is a political approach to the business. We have all things that we can fight in the operating in the market or operating in a regulated market. So this is the reason, the instrument in which you can contrast this pathology of public participation to companies. At the same time, we have a pathology of the private participation to the market over profits and so on. And so I think it's the same thing, and it's very strange to discuss about this. In Europe, usually, but maybe Maria Salvetti can say something more clear. I don't feel that we have the same strong discussion about that we have in Italy. It's normal in all the European countries that there are public companies, companies operating, owned by the public administration, operating in all kinds of markets, not only in the monopolies. But we have, in Italy, we have an history of discussion about a company owned by public administration are allowed only in the case of market failure. But this is not why this. It is not any reasonable argument for this, but maybe some of our relators can say something about this, and I listen very, very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Maria.
Yeah,
To you to conclude this first round with some hints, international hints from your perspective from Paris.
Thank you very much, Franco. And I'm actually trying to share my screen, so hopefully you can see it. I think it's properly. Great. So let me move, because although my obviously my name is Italian, I'm French, and so I'll be sharing with you a bit of thoughts, you know, on the what we call the French concession model, more specifically on the water sector, because it's a little bit complicated, I guess, in France to be thinking about the development of local public services if we don't include in the scenery, in the picture, the concession model. Not being, I mean, I'm not a history specialist, but I went back a little bit, you know, oops, sorry, it's going way too fast. Oops, why is that? Okay, let me go slowly. Although I'm not a history specialist, I had to go back a little bit into the French history and the history of the French concession model. Well, firstly, to answer your first question, Franco, the one that you asked in the abstract of the today's webinar, because actually the first infrastructure and asset that were developed at local level, well, they were not managed necessarily by local authorities. But here, the first major contracts that were signed, for instance, to pave the streets of Paris and to collect the garbage, they date back to the 17th century, and they were basically entrusted by the king himself. So we're talking about Louis XIV and Colbert, one of his ministers, that took care of those contracts. And actually, they've been so successful that those contracts, they have been renewed until 1830, so you know, until the 19th century. So what I'm trying to say by that is that the asset development at first was not necessarily a question of local authorities, and it was more sort of a real top-down decision. And really, then talking about the water sector and focusing on the water sector, we're still in the monarchy era, you know, when the first PPP contract was signed for water supply, you know, in Paris. So that was in 1773 with the brothers Perrier, who actually signed a contract to provide water, to supply water to the city of Paris, and that led to the creation of the Compagnie Générale des Eaux, which centuries later became part of Vivendi and then Veolia. So you know, the whole thing is a sort of a very long story. Now moving on, sorry, I'm having an issue with my, okay. So now moving on to the 18th and 19th century, just to say that then the further development of local public services and especially of water services, but not only water services, then there was a real boost, you know, in this local development, in this modernization of cities, more specifically, and that was during what we call the Second Empire. And so that was from, let's say, broadly 1850 until 1870. And at the time, there was, as you can see on the screen, 42 leases contract that were signed, for instance, by Haussmann, who's the administrator, let's say, of Paris, you know, to put it very, very bluntly. So in order to develop the city, to modernize the city, to bring some health, you know, quality of life in Paris, well, the PPPs contract, concession contracts, and leases were signed. I've quoted, just for the you know, just for the joke, I've quoted that the Eiffel Tower actually obviously doesn't have anything to do with local public services, but the Eiffel Tower was built using a concession contract. So, you know, concession contracts were quite widespread, especially for the development of what was thought at the time and what was at the time a modern city. Another thing that I wanted to highlight was the fact that in the water sector, you cannot be thinking about the development of the local assets, the local infrastructure in the water and sanitation sector without you know, looking at the fact that there was a vertical integration, vertical partnerships between companies. So as you can see, Compagnie Générale des Eaux, so the General Water Company, and Société Générale, which is a bank. So basically you have the alliance and you know, of banks and financial support and financial investors, and the engineering side of the and technical side, you know, of the water sector development. So this is really key to understand also how cities have been modernized during the 19th century in France, because I'm quoting some examples in Paris, but obviously that was the same in Lyon, that was the same in Marseille, and in so many other big and important cities in France. So that's for a little bit for the history part, and then I'm moving towards a more, let's say, a closest period of history. And actually, so as you can understand, in the 70s and 80s in France, we didn't witness a wave of liberalization, because, I mean, obviously the development of the local water and sanitation services, well, they were already, you know, bound with private sector participation. So, but what we've learned, you know, in the recent days is that basically when you look at the bids today, you know, in the water sector, what you see basically is that well, the number of bids is quite, let's say, is quite steady, you know, across the last 20 years. So we have around, you know, more or less around 600 bids per year for water or sanitation contracts. Management contract, so it's quite stable for the past 20 years. And obviously, as you can see, it's during the moment of municipal elections that those bids are less numerous, because obviously during municipal elections, nobody wants to take a decision and action without knowing if they're going to be re-elected or not. Also, you asked the question about the, you know, whether you know, in the current times, you know, if the contracts had changed, you know, the operation contracts, how did they change, you know, in the past decades? Well, what we see in France is that the contract duration has decreased. Well, this is quite logic if you bear in mind that we're not using so much the concession contract anymore, but we're more using operating and operation contracts, which means that the big private water companies in France, they are not being asked to build and operate some infrastructure, but they are more being asked to operate existing infrastructure and sometimes maybe upgrade them, but this is not the bulk, you know, of the contract. So that's why the duration of the contract has decreased, you know, to reach almost 9 years. You know, that's the current average lease contract, affermage contract in France. So that's pretty interesting. Also, one thing that's interesting is because we're talking about competition in the water market, competition for the water market, and so on. But actually, what you see on this graph is that on the top side you have the number of applicants, you know, like candidates to the market. And then the red dot line is for the number of offers that are being handed out to the city, you know. And what you see is that obviously there is quite a difference between the number of candidates, the number of applicants. This is the first round, you know, of the bid. And then the second round of the bid is really when the candidate, you know, hands out the offer. So what you see is that today we only have on average 1.7 offers per bid. So we're talking about competition for the market, but you know, the competition is definitely limited. So that's, I mean, in my opinion, that's a very important aspect that you have to keep in mind, you know, when you're talking about competitive bidding, you know, because I mean, sometimes we can be looking for the competition actually. There is additional observation, because you're asking about the renewal rate, you know, is the incumbent being renewed, or, you know, and well, basically in 2016 in France, the renewal rate, you know, was 84%, meaning that you know, the room for competition once again is quite thick. Quite thin, sorry, it's very thin. As you can see that there is only 5% of infringement procedures when there is a bid, and when the result of the bid is being made public, in 5% of those procedures, there's an infringement from the rejected candidate. And I'll skip the rest of what you see on the slide, and I'll finish up, you know, maybe by opening to your last question and saying, well, what's going to happen, you know, with the post-COVID scenario? Well, you know, I've been talking around, you know, with a French, a sample of French water services, and basically we can definitely be, you know, foreseeing and planning that some investments will happen. For instance, I've been talking to a water service, one of the biggest one in France, you know, that's supplying water to 4 million inhabitants. And what they say is that they are planning to implement reverse osmosis, you know, on their drinking water treatment plant, to make sure that they can get rid of the viruses that could by mischance, you know, get into the water. So and how are they going to fund those important investment? Well, they're thinking obviously of resuming a new PPP to build those new facilities. So maybe that's a new era for PPPs, at least in France, you know, and the concession model. And so moving back to something that's closer to build, operate, and transfer, rather than just operating contract. And that's the same, you know, I've quoted on the slide other aspects, like the emerging challenges of micropollutants, you know, when you will have to be treating in a better way and the wastewater, you know, to get rid of pharmaceutical products, to get rid of pesticides, to get rid of whatever, and also, you know, taking into account the circular economy with the water reuse, the methanization of wastewater sludge that you can use, you know, to generate energy and so on. So a lot of investments, you know, that might be coming up in the next decades, and maybe that's going to be a new era of PPPs, maybe in France, maybe elsewhere also. And I'll stop here, not to be using all the time.
Maria, thank you very much for your impressive empirical contribution to the discussion. And now, I suppose that we have still 15 minutes for a second quick round that is free, but let me suggest, if you agree, a question that is considering sectors of local services that are featured as monopolistic, natural monopoly. Do you think that competition for the market is better than having an old monopolist, an old friend monopolist established, well-known, and strictly regulated? That's my question, but feel free to skip it and to devote this quick last round to hints that you prefer. I will start still from with Andrea Giuntini, and then following Giorgio, Andrea, and Maria.
For 3 minutes, no more, because I took too long for the first round. So and you were patient with me. Just a couple of comments, really. The first one is from a historical point of view. Can we make a comparison with the liberalization wave at the beginning of the 90s with the 50 years of the first globalization? Of course, nothing is the same. Many things are similar. We can compare in a historical view, and I'm just commenting briefly one thing, as Franco in the beginning question was putting a very interesting thing, how neoliberalism, the advent of neoliberalism changed between the 70s, the second half of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s, also the framework of the local public services. And that was the beginning point of the new revolution, which brought to the current situation of market in this framework and in any other framework, economic market economic context, as we know. I think that the heritage of neoliberalism is so relevant, and we should reconstruct some basic steps of economic history since 1973, which could be the benchmark to understand how things are changing in the last decades of the 20th century. From this point of view, the energy crisis, of course. But I think, that is my point, that the wide liberalizing processes inspired by the European Union at the beginning of the 90s, at the beginning of the so-called global economy, are the real turning point to understand how the local public service developed in the last 30 years approximately. That is my comment. It's a historical comment, of course, which kind of heritage we are bringing from the 70s and the 80s, neoliberalism in that epoch, and then what happened starting at the beginning of the 90s, when the new global economy started. The second brief comment is also included in the beginning question by Franco. Is the historical identity of municipalization, and so municipal socialism is the distribution of gains and opportunities in the communities as social benefits, we can say, for the local communities. Everything which was the heart of the law of municipalization and the municipal socialism and all the movements which drove the sector of the local public services at the beginning of the 20th century on and towards new conditions. Are they disappearing? At the end of the day, can we say that in terms of historical comparison, the future of municipal companies is still inspired by the, let's say, the public spirit, I don't say socialist spirit, but anyway, public spirit, and by the still existing social vocation. And everything is really disappeared, and everything was replaced by economic criteria, which are typical of private management. I think that that is a very interesting point of discussion. I think that it is not true that everything disappeared. I say briefly, of course, but I think that also in the economic criteria and the neoliberalizing wave, which was inspired by the European Union at the beginning of the 90s, the social vocation and the public spirit did not disappear. I think that they were transformed so much, they changed so much, so deeply, so radically from many extents. But I think that the ruling of public services today did not forget completely its history.
Thank you, Andrea. Giorgio?
Thank you. Just 3 points. I mean, first point, I mean, the context where public utilities, big local services in the sector that we consider today are operated seems to be rather static now. There are no roaring technological advances in the view, with the partial exception of the energy sector. Especially when we talk about at the local government level. I mean, there is a lot of talk that the 2020s will be an era of huge technological innovation. But I mean, if we then consider what the impact of technological innovation on this sector, I mean, it seems rather modest to me, at least to me. There is also, I mean, the context is static also because demand is static, due either to saturation of consumption or to the decline of the economy, as in the case of Italy. And I mean, static conditions require only the replacement of worn-out capital, not its expansion, reducing the interest of producers and other stakeholders. In other words, I mean, maybe I am too pessimistic, but the factors that gave rise to municipal socialism are missing. We remain mostly in the realm of municipal capitalism and in the need of effective regulation. Second point, I mean, of course, I mean, brief reference to the COVID-19. I mean, as the last intervention reminded that when we talk about epidemics, then of course, especially for developing countries, there is a need. I mean, need of improvement in all this sector. I mean, she referred to water, for example, to clean sanitation, stay clean, and so on. I would also mention, I mean, public housing. I mean, public housing is, I mean, if you read about England and the issue of municipalization, public housing is mentioned, is included. But which is a, I mean, important sector because as the, I mean, one of the main impact of lockdown has been the burden in terms of welfare of confinement in small houses, which is, I mean, poor housing, which means that there is a room for expansion in public housing, where, I mean, frequently local governments are involved directly. And then, I mean, the last point, of course, we talk about this sector. I mean, but the main opportunities, urgent needs of growth and urgent tasks for municipality are possibly outside, for the moment, outside this, I mean, the sector which we refer to as public utilities. I am just mentioning two, I mean, tasks are urgent, are very, I mean, there is a huge variety of them in big number. And also, I mean, municipalities can enter in general in every field where there is a strong demand of citizens. But I'm just referring to two things. One is the social protection sector, where each municipality, we saw, for example, during the pandemic, how important is the role of municipalities in the provision of help, or urgent help, or help to indigent and poor. Also in Italy, we saw the so social sector is a sector, a realm of expansion. The other one, which I am particularly attentive, is, smart cities, and especially regulation of traffic, introduction of smart traffic technology, such as, for example, smart traffic lights technology and the like. Possibly, these are in tier, sector which need, of course, the attention. I don't know, what relationship it has to municipalization, possibly more related to the concession system. It was reported to us referring to the French sector. Okay, and stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. Andrea Sbandati.
Thank you, Franco. I try to answer to your question. As you know, Franco, and as you our followers knows, maybe not exactly from outside from Italy. In Italy, water services, energy services, waste, municipality waste service, and local transportations are regulated by a specific national authority. We have two authorities in Italy, one for water, energy, and waste, and one for transportation. So this is not in the same. It's not the same case of other country in Europe. For example, I don't know, Maria, but in France, I don't know if it's exactly so, but I don't think so. Maybe in other countries is prevalent the regulation by contract. So you make tender, and tender make the efficiency, and so on. So the Italian case is very strange, because in Italy we have at the same time the national regulation through an authority, a very important authority, which define quality of services and prices. At the same time, we have the competition for the market. So we have tenders. We are not obliged, but we can use the tender instruments. I can show a case in the city I live, in Florence. We made a tender for the waste services, and the tender was won by the incumbent, the former Total public company in-house, that after the tender became a provider selected by a tender with a competition for the market. At the same time, this company that is operating in Florence is at the same time regulated by the tender, by the contract, and by the offer it made. And at the same time, it is regulated by the regulation of authority, national authority. It's a very incredible thing. It's very strange because often it happens that we don't understand exactly what is prevalent. What of the two regulation system is prevalent. So I try to answer to you, if in a country we have a national regulated system, I don't think it's so useful to make tenders, because the national regulation is prevalent on the condition of tenders, and the tenders are a very, very strong cost of transactions. For this reason, I want to show, and I conclude, the second example in the city I live in, Florence. We made 8-9 years ago a tender for local transportation, a regional tender. This tender was participated by two companies, the incumbent and the French one, and the new runner. This tender is very interesting tender, but now is not finished all the route to arrive to the assignment, because of a lot of legal conflict. Many at every level, local, regional, national, European court level, and so on. So the cost of transaction of this tender is huge, because we have spent 8 years in legal cost, in postponed decision for the new runner starting point, and so on. So I think that we have to discuss about tender organization of public local services, because are very complex services, and for a very long period. And so it's very easy to have a very strong conflict between the parts when the market is operating. When we have in the first case in the waste tender, we had only one offer, one proposal, so we didn't have any conflict. But in the second case, in the local transportation tender, we have two very aggressive participants, and they start to make a very strong conflict, and now it is not finished. So we don't have any certain about how my bus in front of my house, which label we will have in some months. So it's very incredible. I think if the market is regulated, maybe the tender is not so useful.
Thank you, Andrea. And Maria,
Yeah,
to conclude this second quick round.
Sure. No, very quickly. I think, I mean, I mean, in your question, I believe that the key word is regulation. You know, it's, I mean, I don't believe that it should make any difference whether the operation of a local service, and especially in the water sector, because that's the sector that I know of, is being managed publicly or privately. I think the key issue is the regulation. How do you regulate the operation of the service itself? And I have to say that building upon the French experience, we have a mix, let's say, of self-regulation, which is the common situation for publicly managed water services, and a mix of self-regulation and contract regulation, obviously when there is a private operator operating the service. And just like Andrea was saying, I mean, I don't believe that one system of regulation is better than the other. It's just like how you regulate it, you know, that the means that you have to regulate, the control that you use to regulate, and so on. And I believe that the OECD has produced a quite interesting analytical grid, you know, for regulatory functions and regulatory powers in the water sector, and basically it's rather making sure that all the regulatory functions and all the regulatory powers are duly allocated to some institutions in the country and in society. Then knowing whether it's a central regulator, it's self-regulation, it's contract regulation, this is another story, but really making sure that functions and powers are properly allocated, and that there are some means, you know, that are granted to those institutions to properly fulfill their functions and powers, in my opinion, is the most important.
Maria, thank you. Well, as always happens, a lot of issues have been raised, maybe not too much answers, but this is the DNA of the webinar. Let me thanks again Andrea Giuntini, Giorgio Brosio, Andrea Sbandati, and Maria Salvetti, and also let me thank the very composite and interesting international audience of this seminar from very different countries. And please stay updated with us on our website, turingschool.eu. And ciao to all.